Hello, I am Lisa Diane Wedgeworth. Welcome to Conversations About Abstraction. Joining us today are painters Maysha Mohamedi and Rouzanna Berberian. Both are based in Southern California with studios in downtown Los Angeles and Monrovia, respectively. I had the pleasure of meeting Maysha Mohamedi a few months ago when she invited me to join her and Laura Owens as co-leads for her research and discussion workshop entitled, Who are the BIPOC Abstractionists? Her proposal was accepted by the ICA, and with a handful of dynamic artists, we laid the foundation to create a public directory of BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, People of Color abstractionists from around the world. And she has such a welcoming personality. I looked her up, fell in love with her paintings, resonated with them, and immediately knew that I wanted her to join this conversation. Rouzanna Berberian and I went to grad school together at Cal State LA. Our studios were in adjoining rooms, and I have such wonderful memories of watching Rouzanna paint, having conversations with her about her work. It was just a joy to be there at the same time as Rouzanna. I definitely admire her work and her discipline, her meticulous measuring, and we have seen each other over the years, running into each other at various art openings. And again, she is someone that I knew that I wanted to participate in this conversation. And I am truly honored that both of them are here. They are dynamic artists, they are mothers and wives who are balancing a lot during this time, and I'm glad to share the space with them. Maysha Mohamedi makes abstract paintings using lyrical abstraction. Her marks are geometric metaphors in which the abiding relationships and the eternal conflicts of the self and the world are examined, pondered upon, struggled through, synthesized, resolved, and left unresolved. She is an Iranian American painter who was raised in San Luis Obispo and now lives and works in Los Angeles. She has exhibited widely in New York and Los Angeles, as well as in Sweden and Portland. She is a founding member of the Los Angeles art collective, The Binder of Women, and is the recipient of several awards and residencies, ranging from a National Science Foundation Fellowship in Tokyo to an AICAD New York studio residency. Her work has been profiled in Artforum, the LA Times, the Huffington Post, San Francisco Arts Quarterly, and the Conversation Art Podcast, amongst others. Welcome, Maysha Mohamedi. Rouzanna Berberian explores the relationship of culture and technology by using imagery from technological innovations and communication devices such as radio frequency ID tags, barcodes, and flexible circuit boards to underscore our daily interaction with analog and digital circuitry. Born in Yerevan, Armenia, Rouzanna immigrated to the United States in the 1990s. Her work has been exhibited in solo and group exhibitions in the greater Los Angeles area and in Armenia. She was nominated for Music Center's Bravo Awards for Excellence in Art Education, and her photographs were selected by the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center, portraying a day in the life of Asian Pacific America. She's a member of the She Loves Collective. She teaches digital photography at South Pasadena High School and is very active in her community. Okay, so Maysha and Rouzanna, both of you started out pursuing degrees outside of the art field. Maysha, you were on a path pursuing a degree in neuroscience, and Rouzanna, you in engineering. What shifted? What experience did you have that changed your direction and led you to art?
Well, I can answer first. In Armenia, I never thought growing up that I'm an artist or I have inclination towards art. And naturally, everyone wanted to go to become an engineer. That's the very popular major in Armenia. No one wants their kids to be an artist. So I naturally followed that path, and I was a radio engineering major before coming to United States. And it was 1990, right before the collapse of Soviet Union, when my family decided to come, and I finished 1 year of engineering courses in one of the prestigious Polytechnic Institute in Yerevan. So when I came here, and during that time, I was engineering major in college. Then when I was taking classes, math classes, I would always see people making ceramics downstairs, and I would just be filled with envy. But later in my life, around when I was age 28, I wanted to paint Winnie the Pooh for my son's bedroom, and that's how it started. I just took one class to see if I can be better at drawing, and my first professor was Jim Morphesis. And when I saw him teaching, and I just realized this is what I want to do in my life, and I told him I really want to be an artist. I want to teach art. And he said, you know, it's a long road. It's gonna take a lot of years for you to become an art professor, because you need a lot of references, you need to do a lot of shows. And I said, I just stood there and I said, if you can do it, I can do it. So just like that. And I didn't know that it's going to be a long road, but took many years of art education classes and also pursuing fine arts degree. And finally I got a job at high school, which is I'm very happy to be in.
What about you, Maysha?
Well, I always did creative stuff and loved science at the same time. And I ended up pursuing science more seriously because it just seemed like a better job potential for the future. When I got to the graduate level, I saw something I hadn't really noticed before in myself, because I was looking at my cohort and watching the other students, and they had this kind of like obsession toward whatever their question was, you know, that they were pursuing for their PhD. And I didn't have that. I really liked kind of like the daily activities of being a scientific researcher. I loved the measuring, the pouring, the experiments, you know, all the tinkering stuff was really pleasurable to me. And I've totally brought that into my studio practice. But when I got to that graduate level, I just didn't have the passion to pursue those questions like my classmates did. So when I had to confront in myself, like, what would I care about that much that I could, you know, sustain a lifelong inquiry, essentially, I could only think of two things. One was creating things and exploring expression of self through artwork. And the second thing was to be a mother. So those were two things that I knew no matter what would just always interest me going forward. So I just did something drastic and just ended that education for myself and started taking drawing and painting more seriously.
You both sound like you had an internal question or a longing, you wondering what your question was, your lifelong question, and Rouzanna having this envy of seeing the art students creating and making, and then both of you being mothers, you being led by wanting to initially make something for your child. Just kind of going back to the neuroscience and engineering path, when I think of neuroscience, I'm thinking of the brain and the nervous system, and I'm recalling digital imagery of the brain. We have, you know, we see those images where there are these areas of colors where the brain has been, an X-ray has been made, and there are these areas of red and yellow and blue and green areas of the brain. And even if I'm thinking about engineering, there are the principles of engineering, much like we have the principles of design, elements of art. So there still seems to be, even though there was this longing for something else, there are these little nuggets, I think, within those fields that overlap on some level, and I'm probably making it, but in art, right? You have digital imagery, which has these colors, or primary colors, and design. Did you guys ever make that relationship or think about that at all? If not, it's totally fine. My brain just goes other places sometimes.
Rouzanna, do you want to answer?
Sure. Actually, um, like she said, this inquiry comes naturally, and I didn't even think about a lot of stuff when I started creating. But then recently, when I reflect back, specifically for these conversations, and I started reflecting a little bit more about my practice, and I noticed how much engineering and that left brain thinking has affected my work. Those colors were borrowed from the early components. If you open up devices from 1960s and 70s, somehow they carry that information that's happening in the world at that time. The colors, even though they might be coded certain way in electronics, but then they also reflect what's in fashion at that time. So some of the reds, some of the blues, and then later on I just went on using colors inspired by geometric abstraction or art deco area. I was really obsessed with that 1930s, and I used colors like that. And then Lisa, I don't know if you can remember, in one of the critiques, one of my professors said, um, sorry about this, I'm saying this, I'm quoting him. He said, don't get offended, but I feel like your colors are Armenian colors. And first I thought, why would I be offended if these colors are Armenian colors? Then I started reflecting and I realized these colors were inside me. They were inspired by my surroundings growing up in Armenia, and specifically from a lot of carpets. In Armenian households, they have carpets. This is our treasured possessions that people have. And every home we went, we were surrounded by that. In my home, they were also, during winter times, we would play on it and then play with those geometric shapes. And then I didn't realize how much of those carpets and their patterns and designs affected my work.
Oh, wow.
So
So,
my subconscious, yeah, it really affected.
so then that's going to kind of lead me to some questions that I was going to ask a little later, because Rouzanna, you're starting to answer all of my questions at once. So I do want to get into color, but since you started talking about Armenia and it already being inside of you, then that's a question that I definitely am very interested in knowing for both of you. And then I want to move into specifically talking about abstraction. I mean, although we are, but I have some specific questions. You both have cultural lineage from neighboring countries, Maysha, Iran, and Rouzanna, Armenia. So talk to us about a bit about your cultural history and experience, and how did this help you embrace abstraction? You kind of started in talking about the rugs and the colors. I'd like you to expand a little bit more, and Maysha to join in.
Okay, sure. Like I said, I started reflecting lately how much it affected my work. And then I really got in. I have a friend, his name is Haraj Kozibeyukian, who's a rug expert. And just visiting him and seeing hundreds of rugs in his home, I just realized those patterns are very similar to circuitry. And since my work is concerned about things that collect and store information, I realized these textiles, this woven work are historical things that collect and transfer information from prehistoric times to now. And even those simple patterns and designs that look very geometric. By the way, Armenian rugs are very different from other rugs in terms of their designs because they're very geometrical. And I would say even the rugs from 1700s, and it's predominantly like female made. And I would say Armenian females were the first abstractionists, if you consider their work as art. So those patterns are really affected my work. And on a subconscious level, I did not think about those, but from childhood memories, maybe they transferred, and I see a big relationship in them. So my next step is just pursuing and observing a little bit more and see if those patterns can be juxtaposed with circuitry, and then see how I can connect them on a human level.
Yeah. Maysha?
My connection to my cultural heritage is more connected to language in a few ways. So first of all, the aesthetic of my childhood home, I saw a lot of Farsi. Farsi as a language can be written in very artistic ways. So like I remember this silver plate that was hanging on our kitchen wall that had this gorgeous script on it. or books, or even just my mom's handwriting. These were forms, these calligraphic forms that were the first forms I was looking at as a baby and a child. And I think that that has definitely informed my practice, because first and foremost, I'm very interested in my line quality. And I've been thinking more about it lately in relationship to seeing my mother's handwriting, because I noticed something recently. I have another friend who's Persian, and her mother left me a note, and the note was written in English, but the way she had added like extra flair and kind of flourishes to the letters was the exact same thing my mom does. And it just made it clear to me that those extra curls and loops on text had really kind of seared into my brain at an early age. And that's essentially the form that I put on my surface. Another aspect of language, you know, anyone who grew up in a home where multiple languages were spoken, there's something about being able to shift from one language to the other. That's really, it's a really interesting way to look at the world, because you have, for example, I grew up with two languages, Farsi and English. So I have these two lenses that I can see the world through. And, you know, languages aren't, there's not a one-to-one translation. So I always loved, for example, hearing something in Farsi and not quite being able to figure out an English translation. And to me, that's really the core of abstraction. So abstraction is translation. I'm translating something that's meaningful to me into paint and form and line and shape, which is then being translated for the viewer in some other way, depending on what story they're bringing, what experience they're bringing. So I think anyone who has deep knowledge of at least two languages can intuitively understand how to make a painting like that.
I like this relationship between hearing and speaking two languages, since there are not these direct translations, that allows you to perceive the world differently. And then Rouzanna mining devices that hold, having memory of devices that hold, or artifacts that hold memory and transmit information or communicate to other people, and these being paths into using the language of abstraction to help you be able to embrace that. So then saying that, and that helps you to be able to use this new language, but what is it about the intention of line and color and shape that allows you, that you chose to use those? Because the themes that you are exploring, both of you, could be represented in your work through representational imagery, right? Imagery that's very familiar to us. Why abstraction? Why these formal qualities to make your work? Line, shape, color, texture, the materiality of the work that you make.
Well, for me, I want to make something that has sort of a poetic impact. For me personally, I mean, in some sense, I'm classically trained in that I invested a lot of time in figure drawing and learning how to paint the proper way before I went into abstraction. So I can paint something representationally. And to me, it always, for myself, it always locked down the meaning too tightly. And I always was more drawn to poetic expressions of meaning and ideas. So abstraction was a natural fit for me. In terms of the line, I think that does go back to my figure drawing training, because I was obsessed with figure drawing, you know, because it's like a riddle. Like, you want to be able to depict this human form with kind of, I mean, for me, an economy of mark making. And I remember as I improved in my skill level in figure drawing, there's ways in which, you know, for example, if you're following the contour of a body where you might press the charcoal harder onto the surface, and because you did that, something about the weight of the body is really felt, you know, when you look at that depiction. Or if you're even better, you might feel the vulnerability of the body, or conversely, the strength of that form. And to me, that's when I realized that line has a very emotive quality to it. And line can translate emotion. So that's what I'm doing in my painting. So I'm interested in the line transmitting emotion, but also serving as a trace of the actions that took place during the time frame of creating the painting.
Do you plan the lines in your work, or is it more of an organic process as you're making? I heard you speak about every line having intention in your work. So how much of it, for both of you in your work, and Rouzanna, your lines and shapes, how much of it is planned, how much of it is organic?
Mine is pretty organic, but I also look back and take inventory of what I've done, and I'll pull, you know, from different paintings, I'll pull my idiosyncratic language and play with that. But I'm not really someone who keeps sketchbooks of drawings. My sketchbooks are actually more writing. And then, yeah, it kind of materializes on the surface itself in the moment.
What about you, Rouzanna?
I think I would say mine is the opposite way. Before this series, I used to paint very organically, like her, very intuitively. But then later on, when I started deconstructing or disassembling these electronic devices, and I got obsessed with this circuitry imagery, I do a lot of planning, and I do a lot of sketches, and I plan and I reduce those shapes and forms into their minimal, and then I started seeing faces, and I think the influence on those came from going to Armenian church and then seeing all those Armenian or Greek church in Los Angeles. They always do these Greek festivals, and I visited this Saint Sophia church in Pasadena that has this wall that's called Iconostasis. Very these icons look like very flat images of people, and somehow I saw connection between this circuitry and their imagery uh, compared to those. And I started making this circus looking like human beings and making my circuitry very anthropomorphically presented. So when you look at them, they have human size, 2 feet by 6 feet, very human proportions. And somehow I find things that have eyes or their body shapes are like human beings posed in a different way. If you see those images in Iconostasis, like each figure has a certain proportions, and also they're curved or they stand in a certain way. I just saw resemblance in those, and then I thought this circuitry are like godlike or worship-like figures that control our lives somehow. Even though if you see my work, colors are very bright and everything else, but I use very contrasting colors that uh, resonate with each other and make each other vibrant. Sometimes even uncomfortable colors. Just like technology, we love technology. It's very inviting and we are attached to it. But at the same time, if you use it for a while, at least I feel that way, it just makes me nervous. It's just a very uncomfortable thing, um, that you like it and you don't like it at the same time. So therefore I try to use colors like that to make it uncomfortable. And the surface quality, my lines are very straight. It's really hard to paint with oil paints, and the paint is textured. Somehow I just torture myself by creating textures. And if anyone who's a painter, knowing that um, painting textures and then creating a straight line is like very torturous work. And but the thing is, I want since circuitries are screen printed, technique. So I want to emulate that technique by creating these paintings with a brush, but having very flat, impersonal, no feeling, no nothing type of circuitry. So I don't know if it makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So I just want to make sure that I'm clear. I know that, so Maysha was talking about the emotive quality of the line. And are you saying that there is a lack of emotion that's embedded in this work with the circuitry, or I just want to be clear?
Yeah, it's lack of emotions, lack of feeling, lack of anything, just like technology, very cold, very flat, not very inviting, and sometimes uncomfortable. Um, but the line quality and the curves are specific also. And I read someplace that these circuits are designed in a way so they can facilitate faster communication. The faster it is, the more information they can store and pass. They're more desirable. Therefore, even the curves of the circuitry, which facilitates faster. Yeah, actually, what I want to say, those curves are specifically in certain angle that information can pass through faster. So the faster it communicates, faster, the more desirable it becomes. Therefore, they're very impersonal, they're very flat. I intentionally don't put any emotions, any expressive lines in them. They're very cold designs like that.
But even though you say that, when I'm looking at them, I mean, and we can't control how the audience perceives them, the colors are very inviting, right? So the circuit boards themselves and the lines, your intention might be, this is just how I'm perceiving it, to be cold, but I find something very inviting in the colors, and the repetitive nature of the lines lead me into the work and to move around with it. So I'm still very much engaged with it. And after looking at your work in person and engaging with it in that way, I personally don't walk away from it feeling as if I just looked at something that lacked emotion, you know? I feel very excited and invigorated at some level.
It's interesting. Yeah. Sometimes as an artist, we cannot control what audience feels. And there's some works that are more uncomfortable because I use complementary colors. But I think the craftsmanship, what keeps people engaged in the work, because when people see something well done or the craftsmanship, so they just gravitate towards that instead of just the whole thing. I'm like that too when I see something really nicely done. But I personally, when I look at my work, I don't feel like it has any emotions. It's very static, very cold, doesn't have a lot of, even though there are a lot of curved lines, I feel like it's right there, flat. At least that's my feeling.
So speaking of the circuit boards that you're informed by, both of you use cast off objects. Maysha, cheap plastic toys, faded office supplies, the vintage recipe books, and Rouzanna, your circuit boards. What led you to these objects? What attracted you to them?
I think mine, growing up, my uncle always had this workshop in our first floor when I was living, and he had circuitry all the time. And then my husband is in electronics business. They repair photographic equipment. So I'm surrounded by that. And I think the first thing when I started using circuitry was in Dan Duquesne's class at Cal State LA as an undergrad. So the project was to paint a masterwork, but then include some unexpected components. So I painted one of the crucifix of Salvador Dali's, but I made the crucifix out of circuit boards. So I incorporated those patterns in his class. And during that time, I tried to render circuit boards and those components realistically, but then later on, I noticed as technology is changing, those circuits and then those components shrink in size, and then eventually they became as flexible circuits. Flexible circuits are the ones that don't have components in them, but they're the ones that are flat and they can curve it in different way. Therefore, it facilitated these electronic devices that got very miniatured in their sizes, and because they could curve the circuit certain way, and which led into this series that are more inspired by flexible circuits rather than just the basic circuitry motherboard.
Maysha?
For me, I think when I first started seriously painting, I knew that I wanted to say something very meaningful, something big, something emotional, but I didn't know what. It was really hard for me to identify what I wanted to say. I just knew I had a lot to emit, essentially. Um, and it really helped me to find myself in the world in different ways. So I loved going to thrift stores and collecting just different things that I couldn't explain why I was drawn to them, really, and just putting them together and having them exist as essentially like spectators while I worked. Kind of like assembling a team, you know, like the Maysha Mohamedi team or whatever. And I think in the process of honing that skill of identifying these objects, like walking into a junkyard or thrift store and being able to quickly pick out things, I was also building my understanding of what I wanted to say. And then I started using these objects as mark making implements and kind of including them in the process, or more recently picking palettes out of these old books and manuals. And these colors are very connected to my childhood. So anything that's heavily primary, kind of these chalky 1980s colors. I should probably blame my parents because my bedroom was clown themed as a baby. So, and I still have these, they're like these two-dimensional plush clowns that were hanging all over my walls. So everything I love is essentially the color of that scary clown. But the colors are very much reminiscent of that time. And I also just love the idea that these things are useless. I think painting in a way has that useless vibe in our culture, you know, because it's so old fashioned. And yeah, I have to think about that more, but there's some connection there too. Like we're all just sort of old fashioned. We're making paintings and we're collecting old books and stuff.
I love that both of you, in different ways, are mining things from your childhood and experience, whether that is Rouzanna having this archive memory of, you know, the shapes and geometric in the rug, geometric shapes in the rugs, Armenian rugs, or in the church, or colors that are just that you carry with you, and Maysha listening to your spirit and going to vintage stores and finding recipe books and other things, and allowing yourself to connect to what is real and honest with you and incorporating that into your work. And when you said that about the colors of your childhood, I could so relate to that. Me being a child born in 1969, a lot of children's books from the 60s and the 70s, those colors and designs definitely resonate with me. And even though we are from different, born in different decades, when I looked at your work and when I heard you talk about using the palettes from some of these vintage recipe books, I went and started looking at my old Betty Crocker cookbooks. And I was like, yes, these are the colors. Like and I was like, I wondered why I felt like such just a comfort. Just like, they're beautiful, but there's like a comfort in the palette. And when I looked at those, it's like, oh, this is why. Like, this is from my childhood, right?
Oh,
These are palettes that I can relate to for a variety of reasons. I love that. Okay, so where are we here? What else? I have a question. What do you guys want to know about each other?
Well, I'm really kind of stunned, Rouzanna, about your premise that you bring maybe you don't. Do you bring emotion to your process? Because I feel like I've never heard somebody describe their painting that way, like that there's no emotion in the surface. I mean, you seem like a passionate person. Like, do you bring that to the actual making of it?
I think, like I said before, I used to paint like you very intuitively. I would use any materials, my hands, everything else to paint. I really enjoyed the process, but did not like the end product because end product didn't say what I wanted to say as an artist. And just reflecting on my work, um, I think those rugs really affected me. Like Lisa says, you know, reflecting on your childhood, and you just realize, yes, these things affected me. And it didn't dawn on me until I just started paying attention. Why do I like this? Why do I like painting circuits? Why not anything else? Why can't I make portraits? I'm very handy. I can do a lot of stuff. And then people see my other stuff, they go like, oh my God, this is so good. But as an artist, I don't feel like that represents me as much. And then sometimes I even wonder myself, why am I painting circuitry? Why am I making them look very impersonal? Yes, my process is very intense. They might seem very simple, but then I notice simple stuff are very challenging to do. And I think I like the process of challenging myself and torturing myself, having a straight line, even like a half a millimeter little dot shows on my paintings. And maybe I just enjoy that torturing process. And that's what gets me into making this type of work. But again, I want to, I don't know, I just feel like the end process, I really like it. It really resonates with me, and then it resonates from my childhood, whatever happened, and how I was affected by those lines. And it feels very natural to me, very, very comfortable. Like I don't want to paint anything else. It doesn't mean I cannot do it. I just want to feel comfortable in my skin. And I don't care if I show any place. I'm just doing this for me. I won't paint for anybody else but me.
That's so important. I have another question. So you made a comment about how, and I understand this a little bit. You made a comment about how some of the functionality on the circuits is dictated by the architecture of the circuit. So like certain shapes or forms, the information moves faster, right? You said something like that. Do you feel like those areas that you're depicting in your painting also visually are processed quicker by the viewer? Is there a relationship between the functionality of the circuit and how aesthetically or the visual form comes through visually? Does that make sense? Yeah. Like if you have a shape or an angle where the circuit would be processing information quickly, does that form also translate into me seeing it faster? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's not probably you seeing it faster, but I also use golden ratio. I know I just put a lot of thinking in my work. Maybe the end product is like very simple. It doesn't translate that. I also went into golden ratio and then did those proportions, and I realized most people are gravitated towards that. And these patterns, like I said, carpet patterns, circuitry patterns. And I also noticed that if you look at topographical, like a Google map of airports, and then I started observing and seeing even city planning, those streets and how those streets were planned and how those curves are happening. I see a great resemblance in those. So sometimes I wonder if those imagery is inside us, in our memory, in our collective memory.
Yeah.
And we are showing it in different way. Maybe yours is showing through very expressive work. Mine is very static and impersonal work, but it's there.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Now you're a neuroscience, maybe you should expand on that. Do we store this type of imagery and shapes in our brains, or?
Well, I think we do. I think, well, even in the visual system, there's specific areas of the visual system that have neurons dedicated to processing very specific visual information, like oncoming motion, for example, or you know, really, really unique stuff. Like you probably have a neuron that's dedicated to, for example, your mother's face. I mean, this is like an important face, you know, in your life. So I do think that we're sort of built to recognize those patterns. And maybe that kind of answers my question. So like, if there is something that's resembling that golden ratio and your brain recognizes it, it might move over that passage quicker on the surface.
And also, you know, we understand things based on our prior knowledge, right? If I haven't seen a dinosaur, I would see a dinosaur, I would not recognize what it is. So when people see my work, a lot of people go, oh, okay, this looks like a musical instrument. Another person would say something else. So I think the imagery translates differently to different people. And it's based on your prior knowledge, based on your colors or whatever you have been exposed in your childhood, or it's within you, you understand things. And many people, they just felt very comfortable with it. And I realized those Art Deco colors are very comfortable. It's very rational, very symmetrical. So people tend to gravitate towards those. I really don't know. We have to do a lot of research, a lot of searching to do and trying to find out what it means. And I like that it's happening this way. So it's a continuous process to trying to understand something very simple that's inside you.
Right. I do believe in, and I think that with a lot of artists, and just in a variety of fields, but especially with artists, that we do carry ancestral memory. I believe that we do carry these images that have been imprinted on us from the moment that we came out of the womb, and that they end up coming out in our work later. We might not immediately recognize it, but looking back, as Maysha was saying, looking back at inventory of our work, that these shapes or lines or references exist, and potentially, you know, if we're aware of it, we can recognize those. That definitely has happened to me in my work. I remember when I first started jewelry making, I made this ring in this particular shape, and after I looked at it, I said, oh my God, that was this little yellow, I didn't have any, I was gonna say chew toy, like I'm not a dog, but you know, like the teething toy, that's what I was thinking of. But anyway, it wasn't one of those, but it was similar in that, you know, it was this flexible plastic yellow triangular shape with rounded edges that I used to play with as a child. And when I saw it later, it came out in my ring in my 30s that I made. So it's there. So I have another question before we go into questions from the audience. How does scale play an important role in your work? Rouzanna, you have these little circuit boards that come from these electronic devices, but they're 72 inches. Maysha, your work is at least in some with a dimension is 60 inches. Why is scale important?
So
or your choice in your scale important for your work?
Remember, I think I mentioned before that the size is 24 inches by 72, 2 by 7 is like very human size.
That's right. I'm sorry, you did say that.
Human size, which makes them look like human figures. And the thing is, once you see them as figures, you cannot unsee them. That's but also I made them big because these devices, these things are very small. Sometimes I use magnifying glass to look at them. And for me, these things that collect information and then have power over us, because data collection is a big thing and we have no control of it, right? So it's confined in these devices, but when I open them, I expose them and make them large for people to see what is it that somewhat controls our information, somewhat has power over us. So that's, I think that's the thing I was more concentrated on.
I tend to, I just feel better with the marks I make on a larger surface. There's something, it is related to the body also, I think, something that sort of makes me feel smaller helps me reach kind of beyond and make big marks. I bring my whole body to it. But also I think it, again, it kind of goes back to childhood. Like, I don't know if you guys did this, but like if I had trouble falling asleep, I would kind of like make drawings on my wall with my foot, you know, just like, you know, like do weird stuff like that. I feel like that visceral memory of like pushing against the wall or like rubbing a booger somewhere quickly, like so no one sees it, whatever, like something like that from my childhood is so ingrained in me in relationship to a sense of freedom and imagination. And when I am working on a big surface, I'm immediately locked into that freedom. And that's when I make good work, is when I'm not constrained. So
I love that image of a child drawing on the wall with their foot, because we've all done that. And
okay, good. I was wondering if it was just me.
Not me. I would go with my eyes. I remember I would sit, you know, every time we were sitting with family members, I would trace their faces with my eyes as a child.
Ooh.
I always do that until this day. You know, when I'm sitting in one place, my eyes would trace their contour. And then once I'm done with contour, and then it just goes into details. So it's weird. Like you don't know these things until you start reflecting on yourself.
yes.
Mhm.
Well, and then we can all agree that we've all used a body part to draw with somewhere in the world.
Yep.
Okay, we have about 12 minutes. We are going to enable everyone participants can chat with everyone publicly. So everyone can chat. And we'd love to have your questions. Rouzanna and Maysha are also hosts, so they can see. Does everyone have access now to chat? It says everyone can publicly chat. Let me make sure here, yes. So if you have any questions for us, why don't you send them on over, and we'll start answering questions. Can I get a thumbs up from a couple of people to confirm that you can chat? Thank you, Jen Harris. Okay, Anthony Wilburn says yes, and Debbie Sullivan. Hi, Debbie's in the house. Adrian says it's working. So what are some questions you might have for our wonderful painters? Well, while we're waiting for some questions to roll in, I do have a final question for the two of you. If you could pick, since you guys are the first ones, I'll let you choose. If you could pick any element of art, line, shape, color, texture, value to represent you, what would it be and why?
Line.
What type of line? What line direction? What line quality? And why?
Straight lines, as straight and as thin, as clear as they can get.
I don't see you as a straight line, Rouzanna.
It's not me, it's just my work. I'm definitely a jaggedy.
Okay, so I said you, an element of art that would represent you. So you would be what, a jagged line?
Oh, okay, so
yes, you, not your work.
I'll be the crazy line with a lot of textures, a lot of spikes, and then some smooth areas as well.
Maysha, what would you be?
Yeah, mine would be like thick crayon, pressed super hard on a stucco wall line, like all the way down. Like where you can see all the wax bits like coming off.
Right.
I see that.
All righty. Well, we're going to conclude our conversation today. If we don't have any questions, we'll look one more time to see if anything's come through. Oh, someone has, Anthony Wilburn. Can you see that, Rouzanna?
Yes. So he's asking, are you finding that your subject matter circuitry is providing more connections beyond your own experiences? I hope it does to other people. Like I said, it translates differently to different people, and then everyone has their own connections to them. And I think that's basically it. I cannot control what other people feel and do, and I'm yet to find out how it's related to me also. It's just a learning process. As I go, I find out more things. So hopefully it will be beyond what I'm experiencing right now. Otherwise, I'll be bored. I'll definitely paint something else the moment I'm bored.
We have one from, I have a couple students from Los Angeles City College in Glendale here. So I'm very excited to have you guys here. And I will say we have a young artist from Ecuador joining us today. So we have questions that are now coming in. So why don't you guys, Maysha and Rouzanna, feel free to scroll through and just acknowledge the person who's sending it, and just, you can read their question and answer it.
Oh, I like the word geekiness.
Yeah.
Oh, that's one of my students. It says, for both and Lisa as well, do you consider your interests, geekiness in regard to engineering and neuroscience, part of the emotion you put into your painting?
For me, I apply that knowledge of math by doing specific calculations, doing the rule of thirds, or calculating golden ratio in regards to the size of the canvas. So maybe that's how I apply it.
Yeah, same. I think it's more in the analysis aspect and less the emotion. Because I was thinking like I think every painter sort of has this intuitive sense of whether they've done something right, you know, like you kind of step back and you're like, oh, okay, that's good or new, you know. And I think for me, when that happens, it's not romantic for me. Like I know that things are happening, certain things are happening in the brain. So yeah, I think I apply it in terms of analyzing what I've done.
Exactly. I'm very intuitive also, as you mentioned, even though I'm doing a lot of calculations to see if the proportions work, but it needs to feel comfortable. And I know when I'm looking at the work, it feels very comfortable, then I'm done. And also I noticed, it's probably you can explain with neuroscience terms, I look my work upside down, I look my mirror reflected in the mirror. So when it does like that, I can see my mistakes, or I can see the flaws in the painting. So I don't know how you would explain it, Maysha.
Yeah, I have to think about that. I think I need to pull out my neuroscience textbooks.
Okay.
Well, I'll respond also to Young that yes, my interests have always been anthropology and psychology, and that definitely comes out in my work. My work is all about relationships, my childhood memories of my psychological states and emotional states, and my current work is very autobiographical of me looking at myself as a woman today, the various statuses that I'm in, and some childhood memories. So people, relationships, culture, religion, all of those things, spirituality, all of that definitely exists in my work. Really great question. And you are getting your extra credit points for asking that question immediately. Thank you so much. Okay, so we could take about 2 more questions. We have quite a few that are coming in.
Lisa, someone asked how long do your pieces take to make, or what role does time duration play in making both of your work?
Mm.
So mine takes a long time. By preparation, doing a lot of sketches and refining and simplifying. And I do complete drafts on a canvas, and even millimeter distraction, it shows in the work. And painting takes at least like 10 hours a day, for example, just doing one line. And you might think, okay, just one line, but it takes me probably 4 or 5 hours or more just to tape. I tape when I paint. So even using a tape, you have to use it certain way, you have to cut it certain way. You can see there are a lot of curves in my work. So the curves need to be precise. The tape, if it's not applied in certain tension, it might change the curve, and it really shows because it's very simple. So I would say it takes at least 60 to 70 hours to paint one. The big pieces, more narrow ones, maybe a little bit less, but it takes that many hours to paint. And oil paint, I'm resisting painting with acrylic. I don't know why. I feel more connected to oil paint, and I like how light is passing through and reflecting through oil paints. And I'm able to create those textures with brushes because oil paint has this certain viscosity that I can use the brush as topping, and then it just pulls the points out, and that's how the light is reflected in them, creating this shiny, sparkly stuff. I know it does not translate through imagery, but if you see it close up, it has certain like very pixie dust type of quality in them, because the binding material in the oil paint reflects light differently. So Maysha?
Sorry, I'll say, did you want to answer that question? Otherwise, I was going to ask one more before we head out.
Well, I was gonna, someone asked, are habit and intuitive, in the brain, are habit and intuition the same thing? I thought that was an interesting question. I don't think they are, because habit would be like a strengthening of a neural pathway. So like you do something over and over again, that's exact same. And I think intuition requires other areas of analysis to come in. So like if you think of a pitcher on the mound, he's or she's trained to, you know, with that specific musculature to operate in that sequence of motions. That's the habit. But the intuition would be all these kind of like lower level processes that are happening not on the conscious level. Like this pitcher notices that the person coming up to bat has a slight gait. So they just intuitively understand that maybe they're injured, and then they pitch a slightly different way to take advantage of that. That would be the intuition coming in.
Okay, and then the last question we have from Margaret Lazari. What do you, how do each of you think about your next steps, just in a nutshell? What are your next steps?
Like in a painting, or?
That's a good one. I just assume career-wise, maybe.
Oh.
Maybe
Well,
you want to address both in your next steps in painting, but career.
I feel like I'm just constantly freaking out. It's hard. It's just like, I think all I can do is focus on the work, you know, and connections, like how we met, and, you know, and did that project with Laura. Like that was so beautiful, and just focus on the actual paint. Like that's all I can do.
What about you, Rouzanna?
Same here. I'm not really concerned about anything. I'm just making what comes intuitively, what I like. I'm a very type A personality, and my hashtag is don't tell me what to do. So sometimes I don't even want to tell myself what to do. When I just feel like painting, I'm gonna paint that moment. When I don't go with discipline, I'm gonna paint today at this time. It's not like that. I just come home very tired, teaching, for example, many hours, and then going hiking. I'm an avid hiker. I come home 10, 11 o'clock at night, and then suddenly I just want to paint. So that's what I do.
Okay, can we just go back before we close out to that hashtag? So everybody probably remembers on Instagram, there was that movement where women were being nominated or nudged or tagged to post black and white images of themselves. And Rouzanna and I are messaging each other, and I think I might have asked her, she was like, don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me what to post about myself. So she posted a color image of herself. And I said, yeah. I love Rouzanna. That is Rouzanna.
My Instagram, I normally photograph shadows, a lot of shadows and lines, what I see in my environment. And then when people keep sending me these things, oh, just do black and white photo. That time I did color photo.
Well, you guys, first, everyone who is joined us today, thank you so much. We appreciate your interest and your time. Again, we had someone all the way from Ecuador. We have students here. We have artists. We have all sorts of people here. Thank you so much for being with us. And Maysha and Rouzanna, it is truly a pleasure to know you and to share the space with you. And everyone, please share. This recording will exist on YouTube for you to view at a later date. Thank you so much, and we'll be back next month with another Conversations About Abstraction.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Bye.
Bye, Maysha. A pleasure.